All right, we'll kick off now. Hi everyone, welcome to the Law Professional Masterclass for the 2020 Winter Program Day. So great to see so many of your faces on the call. I'm Heather Wirtz. I'm the Program Manager for New South Wales ACT at CareerTrackers. I'm proud to have been with the CareerTrackers team for 4.5 years now and to have seen our law student community grow a lot during this time, and it's fantastic to see so many familiar faces on this call here today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which I'm on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are all meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I'm now going to invite everyone to introduce yourselves in the chat function. Can I get you to share your name, your mob or where you're from, the lands that you're on today, as well as your intern and company and your degree. I know that most of you are studying law, but it's great that we have a few on the call today who are studying other degrees as well. So there's a chat function there, you can start introducing yourselves in there. And it would also be great to see all of your faces. So if you can turn your video on for the call today, that would be amazing as well. As you all start introducing yourselves, I'm going to introduce our fantastic facilitators for today, Dan, Dragovic and Lindsay. Dan and Ashleigh are going to tell you a bit more about themselves, but I'll introduce them briefly now. So Dan is a senior partner in the construction and infrastructure disputes team of Herbert Smith Freehills Perth office and has over 25 years of experience, 16 years of which has been spent as a partner. Earlier this year, Dan was listed as a preeminent WA construction and infrastructure lawyer. Dan currently sits on HSF's Perth Community Committee. He oversees the CareerTrackers program at HSF in Perth and actively participates in the selection of graduate intakes for the Perth office. Our second facilitator for today, Ashleigh, is a Bardi and Torres Strait Islander woman. Her people are from One Arm Point, located in the Kimberley region of Western Australia. CareerTrackers alumni, Ashleigh started with the program back in 2013 with Herbert Smith Freehills as her interning company. She was successful in acquiring a graduate position with HSF in 2017 and is now a junior to mid-level solicitor in the real estate team in Perth. Both Dan and Ashleigh have provided fantastic opportunities and support to the CareerTrackers program and our students in the Perth HSF office over the years, and we're so excited to have them sharing their experience and insights with us today. I'm going to hand over to Ashleigh and Dan shortly, but before I do, I wanted to say thank you to those of you who've already started introducing yourself in the chat. It's so great to hear where you all are today and to hear more about you. Keep introducing yourselves. We are going to make the chat function private in a little bit after we run through the agenda. So keep introducing yourselves for now, and then after that we'll make the chat function private, and then you'll be able to keep engaging and sending through your responses and questions directly through the session from there. Over to you, Dan and Ashleigh.
Thank you very much, Heather. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today and a privilege. I and we would also like to commence by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we sit, the land of the Noongar people and the Whadjuk Nation. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge the traditional owners of lands on which everyone is sitting, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So welcome everyone. Thank you, Heather, for the introduction. As I said, I can't tell you how happy we are to be with you all today. CareerTrackers is an organisation and a program that my firm, Herbert Smith Freehills, our firm, Herbert Smith Freehills, is very proud to be associated with, and certainly personally for me as well. I believe, and certainly my firm believes, that an education and a career are keys to so many positive things in life. And being able to help young Indigenous adults like yourselves reach their full potential as individuals is a privilege that I can not overstate. There's also a little bit of a selfish element, if I can say so. We are always on the lookout for recruiting bright young lawyers like yourselves. So there is a selfish element, as I say, to it. So welcome to the CareerTrackers Legal Masterclass. We'll try and live up to that rather lofty label, but we'll do our best. So as Heather mentioned, my name's Dan Dragovic, and I'm joined today by Ashleigh Lindsay. I'll let Ashleigh introduce herself shortly, but as Heather said, I'm a partner in the Perth office of Herbert Smith Freehills, and next March I will be celebrating 25 years at HSF. I did spend a couple of years early on at another firm, but we'll be 25 years here very shortly. In almost all of that time, as Heather mentioned, I have been involved in the disputes group, what used to be called litigation, and I've specialised over the last 15 or so years in construction disputes. So I act for lots of public and private sector clients in engineering, infrastructure, mining, construction, and resources sectors. Also do a little bit of property, environment and regulatory disputes as well. I'm a member of the Joint Law Society Law Council of Australia Construction Infrastructure Law Committee. So we help with policies in relation to construction law, both here in WA and Australia. As Heather mentioned, I'm the chair of our community committee here in Perth. And I'm also the coordinator for the pro bono program here in Perth as well. I'm also married with 3 teenage daughters, although one turned 20 last month. So perhaps that's enough from me for the moment. I'll hand to Ashleigh to introduce herself.
Yeah, so as Heather said, I'm Bardi. My people are from One Point, but I was born and raised in Geraldton, which is Yamatji country. So it had a bit of a polite ring there. I think it's a bit of a typical story that you hear for Indigenous people, unfortunately. The exposure wasn't good, but came to Perth when I was pregnant at 14 and sort of, gave birth, did all that sort of stuff, dropped out of school and came to the realisation that I had to do something with myself. Went back to year 10 and pushed through education, or the adversity that sits there, being a single mother and a young mother at that. So here I am now in the real estate team, specialising in an area that I really enjoy. You have to enjoy law to be in it. And I think that's enough said for me.
Thanks, Ashleigh. So as Heather mentioned, we've got a fairly packed agenda today. We have about an hour, so I think we're looking to wrap up around 11 a.m. Here in Perth. It'll be different times where different people are. But we want to make the session as interesting and as interactive as possible. There will certainly be some time at the end to discuss questions, but we would certainly encourage you to use the chat function for any questions that you have along the way. And certainly if you have any experiences you'd like to share touching on some of the topics that we'll cover today, certainly let us know via the chat function. But we'll certainly open it up to questions at the end. Perhaps we might stick to questions that are mentioned in the chat function, but we'll also open it up for any interactive questions at the end. As I say, we'll set aside about 15 or so minutes for that to occur. But there'll be lots of opportunities to participate as we go. Heather mentioned there's the chat function, so Heather and Ashleigh and I will kind of try to keep an eye on that and try to weave in any points of interest that are of particular interest to you. There will be a poll. We'll try and run as smooth as we can a breakout session to perhaps have a talk about a couple of the issues we raised today. So feel free to use the chat function to to your pleasure. If there's questions you have as we go, if you've got comments to make or experiences to share, please do so. I think Heather has just popped up our poll. So that's just to get an idea of who it is attending today and what stage of your study and careers you're all at. So we'll keep an eye on that in the next few minutes just to get a sense of who we have. But it looks like we've got a fair mix of largely students. I think it sounds like most people are still at uni at this stage. So what we thought we'd do is loosely break up the session to cover off on 4 broad topics. We want to spend a little bit of time talking about what is currently happening in the legal industry and the legal profession generally. What's exciting and scary about what's happening now, but also what's to happen in the future. We'll then talk a little bit about some of the issues, social issues, community issues that are prevalent in the world at the moment, and how they impact on the legal profession, and how indeed the legal profession is responding and perhaps should respond to some of those issues. We'll also talk about what we think are the attributes of a good lawyer, particularly someone who's about to embark on their career. We'll give that perspective certainly from myself as a senior member of the profession, someone who's been around for a few years, but we'll also get Ashleigh's perspective as well as someone who's relatively new to the profession, but also as a graduate of the CareerTrackers Program and someone who can perhaps give a slightly unique perspective for you all. So thank you for participating in the poll. As I mentioned, there's a good mix of people who are in various stages of study. A lot are certainly second and beyond years, so that's good to know. So you'll all be conscious of and be talking at uni about careers and grad positions and so forth, so we can certainly talk about all of that. So maybe let's then move straight into the first topic I mentioned, which was where the profession is going and what the future holds, what's scary and exciting about that. And no doubt you all will have your own perceptions, you'll have your own ideas, you'll have maybe thoughts about and perhaps apprehensions about what the legal profession looks like and what you're about to embark on. We're keen to hear from you about that. So we're Ashleigh and I will certainly share our thoughts of some of the topical issues in the profession at the moment and where we think it's heading. But before we do that, we might do our first and only breakout session. So I'll defer to Heather to try to set that all up. So what we're trying to achieve here is to break you up into perhaps groups of 4. And I think that gets done automatically. So I think Heather's going to set that up. But what we'd like you to do is have a think in your own groups about your own perceptions, your own thoughts about the legal industry and the legal profession. Of course, you are new to the game, so you will have quite fresh and bright ideas about various things. But certainly, we'd like you to think about what excites you about the profession, what perhaps scares you about it, and where if you can, have a think about, you know, where you think the profession should be going, what role the profession should play in the future and in society more generally. So I think the idea is we'll give you about 5 minutes to have a brief chat amongst your groups of 4. And if one person from each group could perhaps just note in the chat room an idea, an observation, a fear, a positive thought that you come up with during your discussion, and we'll certainly look to weave that into the discussion that Ashleigh and I will have about our own thoughts about where the profession's heading. So, Heather, I'm not sure if we can set that up now and see how we go. So as I say, we'll come back in about 5 minutes and see how the discussion's going.
Thanks, Jan. So I'll break everyone up now. You'll just have to accept the invite to join your breakout room. You'll have 5 minutes in the room to chat together. Make sure you introduce yourselves, and then I'll give you a warning when you've got 30 seconds left to go before we come back as a group. Well, the breakout rooms are working.
It's working, is it, Heather?
Yeah, they're all in there now.
Good. All right.
And so we'll give them till about 22 past, and I'll just pop a message and say they've got 30 seconds left to go before they come back.
Sure. Okay. Maybe just while we're waiting, how do we want to try and, so will you sort of keep an eye on the themes that are coming through on the chat, Heather, and maybe
yeah, we'll do.
Yeah, maybe I'll go first with some thoughts and things, and maybe if you can sort of have a bit of a look at the comments that have come through, and if there are any themes or issues that I haven't covered, maybe we can mention those and we can pick them up.
Yeah. We've got a couple of students who've just joined back in, Ruby and Michael. Happy for you guys to stay on mute there and wait until the rest of the group come back. But let me know if you've got any questions about the breakout rooms if you want to pop off mute as well.
Sure, no problem. Thanks.
Ashleigh, I was watching your girl in the speech yesterday. It was incredible. Oh, not sure if she can hear me.
5 minutes is a really long time when you're not in the room. I'm sure it's going quickly for them.
I'm sure it'll be quick, but yeah, it'll drag on for us, but we'll see how we go.
All right, I might let them know they've got 1 minute to go now.
No worries.
Everyone should start joining back from now, I think. Hi everyone who's rejoining. Don't forget to pop your thoughts from your group into the chat. Looking forward to hearing how everyone's discussions went.
Thanks, Heather. So maybe while everyone's populating the chat function with their group's thoughts, I might just share some thoughts of my own and Ashleigh as well. So we'll kind of tag team a little bit in this session around some of the topical issues in the profession right now. And the way I thought we'd deal with this is to perhaps split it into two broad categories. One is sort of internal things, internal aspects. In other words, the way law firms do things and the way that's changing. But also the second category is look at externally, so what is happening in the market that is then impacting on law firms, and particularly the way people who consume legal services are effectively demanding change from their legal service providers, namely us as lawyers and law firms. So there's plenty to unpack, certainly from my perspective. So we thought we'd spend a few minutes just talking about some of the ways in which law firms are changing internally, the way in which we do things. So it's important to perhaps understand that law firms are very different organisations. We're not an Apple or a Samsung who produces things. We don't have a factory floor. We have essentially a group of people who work together to solve problems for our clients. So we work together and relationships and communication and so forth. These are things we'll talk a bit about in the next session, but these are all important things that we do internally. Now, we do have a traditional office and that's the way law firms traditionally have operated. People come to work and people work together within the office. The way in which lawyers work these days has changed, and we'll touch on the impacts of the coronavirus in a moment, but certainly prior to COVID-19, there was a growing, albeit fairly slow uptake, because law firms are very traditional organisations, but a slow uptake in things called, and there are different labels for them, but things like agile working. So people who choose to work from home and all of the challenges that brings to bear. So the way in which lawyers work and where they work is certainly changing, and a lot of our lawyers, junior and senior, are telling us that they would like the flexibility of being able to work in different ways and from different locations. So that's certainly, prior to COVID-19, become far more popular way of working, certainly amongst our lawyers and certainly what we observe in other firms as well. But certainly COVID-19 kind of changed everything, including the way in which lawyers work. So suddenly agile working, working from home was a necessity. And what it taught us is that this could in fact work. You know, we as leaders within our firms could trust our people to work from home. The technology worked. Zoom and Teams are functions that can very easily replace physical face-to-face meetings. So the way of connecting has changed, but the core of our service, which is delivering legal services and assisting with legal problems, didn't change right throughout. So the way in which we work and the technology required for that was certainly something that was a bit of an eye-opener for all of us during the pandemic. And so as we're emerging, we're also realising that people also need to connect. So there'll always be a role for an office, but agile working, I think, generally is going to become more popular. Actually, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say about agile working.
And so generally, you know, when you're a law student at university, you have this perception of law firms that there is no work-life balance. And I think the agile working has taught us that you can have that bit of more balance there. It's a bit better. But for example, like I'm a mother, I've got sports and stuff, so I pick to work from home on a Wednesday, this being an exception. So I can get my children to sports, and so, but I can still then bill the hours that I need to do, still be available to my partner and to the team. So it's created a new world where the seniors all understand that, you know, you've got your priorities outside, you can still meet those and meet what is required of you at work. So I think it's really exciting from a junior perspective, and everybody's sort of just understanding that you can do it, and technology gives us that ability. So it is really exciting time, I think.
The other thing to note just about agile working is one of the counterbalances is, yes, it can improve work-life balance, but it could actually undermine it to some degree. Sometimes the distinction and where you draw the line between work and home can be a bit blurred if you're essentially working from home. But what we're talking about here is having the flexibility, perhaps having still the primary place of work to be the office, but being able to work from other places as well. The other thing that's kind of a little bit scary from my perspective, because I'm an old person, but is exciting nonetheless, and exciting to more junior lawyers particularly, is how technology is impacting on the legal profession and the digitisation of the practice of law. That is quite daunting. We're starting to see that now. There's lots of reports around lawyers being made redundant because you know, computers will do the thinking that lawyers currently do. I'm not sure we'll ever get to that stage, because there are lots of nuances in the way in which the law works and the way in which we advise our clients. So there'll be, I think, always a place for human brains, assisted, I think, by technology, to perhaps do a lot of the some of the rote work that lawyers traditionally have done. And we're certainly seeing that, certainly in my practice group in disputes. And for those that are aware of the process, discovery or disclosure and arbitration can be a massive burden, particularly in the digital age where the explosion of data and communications has meant that reviewing this massive material becomes problematic manually. So we have lots of things like artificial learning that's able to sort through and essentially narrow down a massive amount of information to something that's quite a lot smaller and more relevant. So they're all exciting things. So I get scared at the thought of new technology and computers running the world, but equally the use of technology and being able to do things differently and more efficiently certainly excites me. But also things like some of the internal processes, even entering time, lawyers charge by their time. So that's becoming more automated, a lot more predictive time entry and so forth. So that's, I think, the way of the future and something that's that I'm certainly looking forward to. I wanted to touch briefly on perhaps some of the external aspects. Certainly what has changed a lot in the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years is how globalised Australia's economy has become. So there are certainly traditionally, so certainly when I was starting out in the law, you had a bunch of smaller firms, you had some larger firms, all essentially doing their thing, certainly from a Perth perspective, servicing Perth clients. That has changed a lot, so we are acting now for a lot of global companies who've entered into the Australian market or looking to obviously explore the opportunities that exist here. So the Australian economy is globalising. I think that gives law firms opportunities. I think that gives lawyers opportunities. So doing a lot more international work, working on international arbitrations, doing global deals, working with other firms and clients globally, I think is an exciting development for lawyers. The other thing, just briefly about globalisation, is the explosion of international firms in Australia. So a lot of firms, predominantly from the UK, some from the US, and perhaps increasingly so, are coming into the Australian market and are interested in Australia as essentially a base for work in Asia. So a lot of law firms are seeing opportunities to work more in Asian markets and with Asian clients regarding things like the infrastructure investment that is happening on that continent, particularly in Southeast Asia and particularly in China. So a lot of firms are looking at China. We have ourselves 3 offices in China, if we include Hong Kong. So that's changing rapidly as well. But again, lots of opportunities for graduates and young lawyers coming through. The only other thing I was going to mention is the way in which lawyers charge for their time. So it is all time-based. We don't produce products. We give of our brains, and people pay for our thinking. So we charge by time, but that is changing. So traditionally, we talk about billable hours, but clients are looking for a lot more certainty around costs, and so there'll be a much greater emphasis on what are called alternate fee arrangements. So being able to charge in a different way. So that will change rapidly in our profession as well.
I see that, Heather, there's some thoughts coming through from the group.
Yeah, so the group, we're also discussing the impacts of technology on the industry, hearing about things like robots drawing up wills and the importance of e-signatures in the world today. There was also some discussion around the impacts of COVID and seeing the legal industry respond to needing to be more agile at this time. There was also a group that spoke about the difficulties in finding a niche area in the law that they're passionate about, but then the dangers of sort of not knowing what the demand is for that area, either sort of the demand in the corporate structure or the public sphere for that niche area that they have enjoyed studying or they've discovered through interning. What are your thoughts on that and finding that niche area that you really relate to and then not knowing whether there's a demand for that in the industry?
Yeah, so I can certainly touch on that. So this was going to be one of the themes we'd pick up in sort of what makes an excellent lawyer, and certainly from my perspective, having contacts in the industry, having mentors in the industry, people who will be able to help you with those sorts of decisions. So, and I think the group that came up with that idea, I think have hit it on the head in the sense that there might be something that they are particularly passionate about, but that won't be of much use if they are looking to practice that area here in Australia if there's no demand for it. There'll always be opportunities to practice in those sorts of areas, but they might be very limited. They might be public sector focused. They might be perhaps more prevalent internationally. I know a lot of lawyers starting their law degrees are very passionate about human rights, for example. And we have in Australia a fairly small practice regarding things like modern slavery, anti-bribery corruption, and indeed human rights. We do a little bit of pro bono work in that segment, but apart from some advice to clients around how they deal with modern slavery, particularly as it impacts on international supply chains, for example, that's something that clients here occasionally seek some advice on. But it is a very specialised area, and one that perhaps even only a few firms and perhaps even only a few lawyers within those firms practice. So I'd encourage people to talk to people in the industry, take advantage of your internship. So I saw there's a few people who are at law firms at the moment. So tap into those networks. I mean, this is part of the internship program is not just about getting experience in doing legal work at firms, but it's also building your networks and getting contacts within the industry who can help you ultimately make those sorts of decisions. From my perspective, there's lots of demand for disputes lawyers, particularly right now post-COVID. Lots of opportunities in the construction infrastructure sector. So the state and federal governments are looking to invest heavily in those areas. And from a construction disputes perspective like mine, that can only mean an increase in demand for those services, and certainly front end, so contract drafting for lots of those infrastructure projects. So I'd encourage you to speak to lots of people, tap into your networks, and have that discussion about which niche area you'd prefer to go into.
I think add to that a little bit as well. During my sort of initial years, moving on to the grad position, I think I was looking at going into native title and specialising in a particular area, and so a lot of mentors sort of directed me in the space of you should probably look at wanting to generalise in something. And so, for example, now I've gone and in generalising in land access, it turns out I don't actually have an interest in native title. That was just something that popped in my mind at university, but it's not as exciting in the real world. And so I think when we're this young, we should be looking to just generalise and have a lot of different skill set. And when you're 5 years in or something like that, and I'm not even there yet, I think that's a good space to then be like, all right, so what do I actually want to start specialising in? Because if you spend your first 5 years at a law firm like this, it sets you up with the skills that you need to then go and do what you want to do. And we see that a lot where people have spent their years in a firm like this, and they've gone off then and they'll jump into human rights, or they'll go back to not-for-profits and stuff like that, and they'll go into very different areas. So it's, I think, getting yourself into a good place where you can learn the skills to be a really good lawyer, then really finding that niche later on. I think that's also a good place to start, not just jumping straight into a niche from the get-go. So.
Excellent. So we covered off a bit on the technology side of things. Certainly COVID we've touched on as well, certainly taught the legal profession how quickly they can adapt to change. I think the legal profession traditionally has been slow at change, but I think what COVID proved is that law firms, like every other business, when there's a need, can adapt very quickly. So I think that's been a positive, certainly. I've just got one eye on the time, Heather, so I think we might jump to the next topic, which is, and we might try to cover this fairly quickly, because I'd like to get to obviously talking about what is relevant to you all, and that's tips for excellence and building your careers. So one of the things, and we'll touch on this briefly, is things like how the legal profession responds to community issues. So we've seen a lot in the media lately around things like the Me Too movement, under the umbrella of diversity and inclusion. So Me Too, racial discrimination with Black Lives Matter, for example, Indigenous issues, reconciliation, etc. But also environment, lots of demand for change, lots of coordinated protests about with groups such as Extinction Rebellion, coordinating change and demanding change from governments locally but globally around impacts on the environment of human activity. So the question does arise, should the legal profession and the business community generally be actively responding to or commenting on these industries or on these issues? Traditionally, businesses have steered away from that, but increasingly they're becoming more comfortable in doing so, and the law firms are the same. We saw that a lot with the same-sex marriage debate a couple of years ago. We're seeing that now with Black Lives Matter. So certainly our firm has come out quite strongly and made public statements around support for measures combating racial discrimination, support for same-sex marriage. So they're not universally agreed upon, but certainly the majority view is that business leaders should be making statements about this and leading discussion about issues in the community. And so, partners of law firms should be doing the same and are doing the same. And I'm certainly comfortable with our firm taking a stand on issues in the community. And the only other thing I'd mention about this is social media has enabled law firms and lawyers within firms to certainly make statements about this. And that's traditionally been a bit of a hesitation amongst lawyers to make controversial statements. There are, of course, boundaries, but certainly on these issues, people are certainly finding their voice. And we've certainly seen with the Dyson Hayden discussion recently that the law's not immune, and even the most prestigious and highest office within the law, namely the High Court, is not immune from things like sexual harassment and discrimination against women in particular. So, law firms and lawyers, I think, can and should and are making those sorts of stands. So then let's talk about barriers to success and perhaps the ingredients of excellence in terms of lawyers and graduates coming through into the profession. I think I come from this with a particular perspective. So I'm on the recruitment panel for our firm here in Perth. So I see a lot of applications from graduates, and I see a lot of people who do clerkships, internships within our organisation who eventually come in. So we see something like, in Perth only, 300 or 400 applications a year. That gets whittled down to about 70 to 80 And that's largely based on CVs and academic transcripts. So if we have one certainly tip to pass on, is certainly work hard at university, get your grades as healthy as you can get them, because there is a process whereby applications are sorted purely on marks and CVs. Certainly I encourage you to make your CVs as diverse as possible, certainly include not only the work you've done within firms, but also work you've done in the community. That sort of thing always stands out in those applications. Certainly, I was never a fan of goal setting early on. A lot was, I felt, beyond my control, but I think goal setting is a must. And I think things like learning from as many people as possible, having experience with and working with as many lawyers as possible is very helpful for your development and your careers going forward. A couple of other things. I mean, we do have within the firm a core set of criteria, competencies, and we can touch on those specifically. But I think we can boil those down to really three elements, three tips, if I can call them that. And the first is attitude. Be enthusiastic. Look at every opportunity that's given to you as an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow, and an opportunity to prove yourself. So certainly when we have graduates and law students come into our firm, we look a lot at, what they bring, what attitude they bring to their work. If they're seen as a very keen, enthusiastic, willing to learn from their mistakes individuals, that gives us confidence that they're willing to assist us and assist our clients to get the best service they can. So I can't emphasize enough having the right attitude and enthusiasm for the work you do. There will be boring jobs that you'll do, there's no question, but even attack those jobs with a positive attitude will certainly help you in your careers. The other thing, don't be afraid to form a view. A lot of graduates and juniors and law students we see are very good at research, are very good at summarising things, but they don't actually tie that all together. They don't form a view. Don't be afraid to stick your neck on the line and say, look, Dan, I think the answer is this, and don't be afraid to defend it. So if you've got a problem, you've done the research, you're confident with your position, don't be afraid to discuss that and be prepared to defend it. Obviously investigate all of the counter arguments, the points of weakness. Always look at ways of being able to certainly come to a view and be prepared to debate it. And the final thing, I think this is the most important, is be yourself. This is a great time, I think, to be a law graduate. And I think this is a great time to be an Indigenous law graduate. And I think because every firm is crying out for diversity within their organisation. We touched on some of the problems that exist within law firms. Sexual harassment is an issue. I actually think that having female lawyers in leadership roles within law firms and organisations will naturally change that culture. Law firms far too often have been seen as a bit of a boys' club. Traditionally, men, white middle-aged men have run these organisations that tend to breed unhealthy behaviours. So having a diversity of thought at senior leadership and decision-making roles will help those organisations. So not only women, Indigenous and ethnically diverse people in decision-making roles assists in bringing different perspectives that I think are invaluable to the future direction of law firms, but also the way in which they are run. So I'd encourage you to certainly be yourselves. It leads to fairly negative outcomes if you try and pretend to be something else or be someone else. So your greatest asset, I think, is to be yourselves, show who you are, be keen, and I think you'll go very far in the profession. Ash, I don't know if you've got any observations about that.
I mean, there's only one thing that I really want to add, and it's the importance of treating juniors well, especially secretaries and or any other interns, paralegals and stuff like that. If the way you treat them also goes a long way to working out whether you're going to be a good person for people to work with. I mean, just for example, briefly, we had a clerk come through. This clerk was a client. He was quite old in age, and he was excellent at the work. He was amazing, like fantastic. Seniors loved him, but he treated juniors poorly. So he wasn't given a shot. The managing partner here said, nope, not over my dead body. We're not having this person in our organisation. Doesn't treat people well, juniors well. So the juniors communicated that to the seniors, said, hey, no, not very nice. And so, he was turned away on that basis. So I think that is really important to remember. Treat everyone equally, no matter their status. Because brown nosing, I think the senior people, it's just not going to get you anywhere, not nowadays.
Actually,
Exactly.
there's a question that's come through from the group for you as well, kind of related to some of the discussion that's just happened, and it's around the perception, I guess, in the media around the legal industry being a male-dominated industry and the challenges that can have on females entering the industry. And the question is, what are your thoughts on how the legal industry is currently being perceived?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's being perceived unfairly now. I think the graduates that we're getting through now, it's, again, at senior level, we've still got some male dominance, but in the graduates that we've got through, it's just females. The graduate pool from this year for our firm in particular, we had one male out of 13 or 12. So I think more females are coming through, and then that hopefully will trickle upwards. Naturally, some people decide that law is not for them. It is a difficult industry to be in. It requires quite a bit, and so you've got to make some calls about what you're going to do in terms of family and some sacrifices that you have to make. But I mean, if you're going to be pursuing a career in anywhere, I think those sacrifices will need to be made. So I don't think it's fair to say that just about law. I think it's quite a broad thing to say about anywhere where the career is, and and the pay you're looking at is quite high. It's those sort of industries that demand quite a lot of your time. So yeah, I think there's more females coming through, and I think we'll start to see some leadership changes and some more females coming up. I've got a lot of senior females around me, so it's amazing. So I'm not dominated by just men around me. So yeah, I find it easy enough to work in.
And Heather, maybe I can just add to that briefly. So Ashleigh's right. We are recruiting many more female graduates at the moment. The problem for us, and Ashleigh, hoped that they would get into the senior leadership roles. There is a problem there. We have been recruiting at least 50% female graduates for many years now. And at the moment here in Perth, we have 3 female partners, 3 out of 22, I think, which is a very poor number, and that's something we're not particularly proud of. So we are looking at what those barriers are. Is there some conscious or unconscious barriers that are being put in place that are preventing female lawyers who want to aspire to partnership and senior leadership roles? Is there some problem that is inherent in the structure of the organisation that is preventing that? So that is something we have been actively looking at for many years. I'm not sure we've found the answer. I think globally, our numbers are improving slightly. If that's a measure, I think it is. So I think globally we've got over 27% female partners. But again, that's not reflective of the numbers here in Perth. So we are actively considering that and wanting to make sure that there's no unconscious perceptions around things like part-time lawyers. I know traditionally, because I used to live in this era where, you know, senior middle-aged men when I was a junior lawyer were of the view that generally female lawyers, very talented female lawyers who were working part-time, didn't have the commitment, you know, weren't committed to the firm. Those attitudes are changing. So, and we certainly don't want to lose the very talented female lawyers that are working part-time, who are balancing life at home with their careers. There's no reason those people can't become involved in senior leadership roles within the firm.
And you know, and on that note, like, we've literally just made a female up to partner, and she works 4 days a week. She's got 2 very young children at home, and I get to work closely with her, so it's really, really cool to see. And I think a lot of the talk amongst the juniors at the time that she was being promoted, it was exciting. It's really cool to see, because then it means that we're not afraid to also take a similar path to her. So.
Thanks for your thoughts on that question, and I've had some other great questions on that topic coming through from the group, but with only a few minutes to go, I wanted to ask a different question that's come through on a completely different topic before we finish at 1, and it's that, is it true that a distinction law WAM is a competitive mark when applying for corporate firms, or is that a stereotype, and should the real goal be a HD WAM?
So I mean, I can certainly answer that from my perspective. I mentioned the process we go through. So we literally receive hundreds of applications, and in order to get that number down to something that's manageable, to at least have, you know, 70, 80 interviews with candidates, we have to rely on what is in their CVs and their marks. So marks do count. I think it's wrong to say that, you know, you cannot have anything other than high distinctions or a high distinction average or a GPA of, you know, 28 or 30 in order to get into a large firm. We have had some excellent candidates who've come through with perhaps slightly lower GPAs, but they have had something that's attracted the attention of our HR team, particularly in relation to work they might have done, or adversity they've overcome, or something else that perhaps just sets them apart. So again, I mentioned earlier, certainly talk up some of these other aspects to your CVs, things about working in community, things that you've had to overcome in life or elsewhere. So, and that's regardless of whether your marks are good or indifferent. That is not the sole criteria, certainly for our selection process. And from my perspective, once we have the people in the room, once we are interviewing, marks don't matter. It's all about the individual. So I want to know about you, and I want to know if you're someone who we think can fit in and work within our team, because in a large firm in particular, which sets it apart from smaller firms, is working in teams and being able to communicate with big clients. So if there's a sense that, you know, the candidate can't do that, they won't survive the interview phase. So hopefully that's answered that question, Heather.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that brings us to 1 o'clock. I feel like an hour goes so quickly. I wanted to say a really big thank you to you, Dan and Ashleigh, for taking the time to facilitate today and sharing your experience with everyone. It's been great to hear your insights and also I think to have some of the practical takeaways from today's session for everyone here as well. A big thank you also to Brianna and Marie from our team who've been supporting on the call today in the background. Thank you both. And a really big thank you to all of you for being here today, for participating and for the fantastic questions that you've emailed, been sending through in the chat as well. Really appreciate all of your contributions. So best of luck everyone for the rest of today. Thanks so much for being here and have a great afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.